Good to have you back here going down the road with us. Paul Seegert's our guest now. We're going to get a chance to visit with the managing partner of PCS Advisers. I want to talk to him a little bit about whether or not President Trump passed on buying those vaccine doses. But first, I want to make sure Paul gets a chance to tell you about PCS Advisers. Paul, welcome to Down the Road.
Thanks for having me. We're a firm that works with employers, helping them control healthcare costs. I used to work for a national insurer. Actually, I was a Russian intelligence analyst in my first career. And so I've had two of the most exciting jobs a human can have. And I got out of working for an insurer and started to work for the consumer because I found out we had a really great business model for the insurer, not as much for the consumer. So it's been fun to do that for the last 10 or so years.
Are you sure you picked the right time to do that? I mean, we're in the middle of a pandemic. Are you comfortable with the fact that you made the right career choice?
Well, I'll tell you what, but they need us more now than ever. Costs are out of control, and what we're seeing with the pandemic is really just an example of that.
Yeah, well, you're spot on about that. One of the questions, obviously, I have for you is, and it's making all sorts of news nationally, is whether or not when Pfizer made the offer to the U.S. that, hey, if you contract, if you commit to this, if we can make sure that we've got some money coming in, we'll make sure you have the vaccine before everybody else. Did Donald Trump drop the ball here?
Well, we did pre-buy 100 million doses with the option to buy 500 more. And then it was reported here recently that we missed an opportunity to lock in another 100 million doses this summer. And that, in fact, and that was initially denied, but it's been corroborated by enough sources now that I think it's accepted as fact. And in addition to that, one of the board members for Pfizer came out, who was a former FDA, high-level person at the FDA, came out and said that they asked multiple times of the administration, did they want to pre-buy another 100 million doses that would be allocated for the second quarter or not? And at that time, they also provided additional research showing that the vaccine was tracking to get to be effective. So in retrospect, I think it is a mistake that we did not lock those in, although it's not as dire as it might be. We expect we'll have 5 in production by February, 5 different vaccines.
So how much did we decide it wasn't worth to send that money on to Pfizer? Because I'm assuming what they were looking for was the type of seed money that would cover the expenses they had. And as you pointed out, there was already evidence that the vaccine was going to work. So what I'm curious about is how much would have it cost us to pick up that bar tab?
Right. Yeah, they're going to cost about the same as a flu vaccine, about $40. And so we're watching one of the biggest arms races, so to speak, that we've seen in our lifetime as far as pharma goes, big pharma. You've got all of these companies racing to get these vaccines completed because we're talking about vaccination on a scale we've never done before. 70% of the population globally of 8 billion people times $40 is what's at play. Huge. It's a huge, huge pot of money.
So the amount of money that it would have cost us to do this, though, I mean, when you compare and contrast that to the money that we're looking at in the PPP bill that we've shipped out to local states, I mean, this is peanuts. What we would have spent here versus what we're even talking about in this debate between McConnell and Pelosi. I mean, Paul, this is next to nothing. Why wouldn't we buy at least that insurance, for lack of a better way of putting it?
Right. I think it was part of their normal negotiation or maybe a little bit of unorthodox negotiation that we've seen. And they expected some of these others would come through more quickly. We will have the Moderna's vaccine likely will be right on the heels of Pfizer's. And then AstraZeneca's is already right on the heels of that. It'll get approved more quickly overseas than here. Their trials were slowed down here a bit. And then a couple more after that. Now, just today, additional news there, 3 countries have approved this vaccine ahead of us. And when you compare the pre-buys that have been made, the European Union's pre-bought 1.65 billion doses. I mean, they're way out front on pre-buying supply, you could say.
Well, okay, going back to what I'm getting at, the expense versus the gain. You've already got a signal that it's working. Then you decide,
Yep.
you know what, I'm not going to pre-buy, which makes me wonder who's got stock in what. I'm sorry. That's maybe the conspiracy theory in me. But you're sitting there comparing how Europe already is way ahead of us in terms of pre-buying, and so they're going to get that vaccine earlier. So, you know, in terms of every day that we're sitting here in this pandemic, I'm wondering how much money we're losing in the economy. If I'm running a small bar, if I'm running a restaurant, and I'm sitting there and I'm shut down for months on end, which much of the country is now, I mean, all I want to do is crank up my business. And I don't know if you can put a dollar amount to that, Paul. I mean, this seems like the cheapest insurance that we as a country could have bought.
I totally agree. Better to have more than you need than not enough. And what we hear now from Pfizer is that they may not be able to provide additional doses to Americans until June. So now we're in the position where we'll be relying on other manufacturers that are yet to be approved but close to fill the gap.
Yeah. Well, that isn't good news. That isn't good news. Let's talk about, if we can, all the other individuals that or individual companies that are coming forth with this. When you look at how fast you can turn this around, because I have a theory, and then you as an expert in the field can say, well, that's just not right, Joel. But I want to float the theory by you. You said, and you're right, that this is highly competitive, that you've got companies that you don't want to be third or fourth in this race. And so if I owned one of those companies and I've got trials out there and it looks good and I'm going to end up at the Food and Drug Administration earlier than what people thought so that I can get that approval, I'm already making the vaccine. Because if I'm not making the vaccine and my competitor says, we just got approval and we've got the vaccine ready, I'm the loser. I mean, I'm the loser as far as that drug company has. So my assumption, Paul, is that there's a lot of vaccine already made and just waiting to be distributed. True or not?
True. Absolutely. They've tested the supply chain. In the U.S., they've contracted with McKesson to do that, to run that distribution, with the exception of Pfizer. They're running their own supply chain, in part because it's so difficult to... It requires such cold temperatures to store this particular vaccine. It's South Pole temperatures. And so they've developed special cases for it. They've contracted up some of the airliners that we're not using because of the lockdowns and what you pointed to earlier in terms of our shutdown. They're going to be flying vaccines around. So there's millions of doses already on shelves.
So I have one more theory. And Paul's sitting there going, really? I mean, you're a former state senator and a radio talk show host out of North Dakota. But I have one more theory. I call it my kids in the car theory, right? So I'm driving my two girls back when they were young. And they're, when are we going to get there? When are we going to get there? You know, how long is it, Dad? How far? That kind of question. And so you look at the clock and you say, we will be there by 10 o'clock. When you know you're going to be there by 9:30. But it's a way to shut them up. It's a way to get them to the point where they're looking at that clock and instead of anticipating, they know. And then if you get there early, they're not going to complain. They're going to be happy. They could care less whether or not you might have fibbed in the beginning. Are we looking at that when it comes to people being vaccinated? Everybody's talking about, well, it'll be late spring, summer, it could be by the 4th of July. Is that just buying insurance? Are we going to be vaccinated, you know, by March, for example?
I don't think we will. Here's why. So we have 40 million doses that we expect we'll get in the U.S. from Pfizer and Moderna. The others won't be approved in time to affect this year. And the ACIP, which is the organization that informs the CDC as to who should get vaccinated in what order, has said we would start with healthcare workers, frontline healthcare workers. We have 21 million healthcare workers, and it takes 2 doses per person. We're going to have 40 million by the end of the year. So we won't quite have enough for frontline healthcare workers by the end of 2020. We'll get into 2021. Next in line will be 3 million people in skilled nursing facilities, rest homes, that kind of thing, plus the remaining healthcare workers. That's another 4 million. So we would need 8 million doses for that we don't yet have. And it will be ramping up production. So it's likely summer before people that are not in these high-risk groups or priority groups are up for vaccination. It'll go in that order of healthcare, elderly in care facilities, frontline workers. These would be law enforcement folks, teachers, food workers, people in the food industry, and on down to those with underlying health conditions, elderly that are in generally good health, and then the rest of us.
You know, and I'm very fearful of how you're going to keep people held down or calmed down, for that long. I really am. When the vaccine starts going out and people know the ambulance driver in Steele, North Dakota that's already been vaccinated, and they say, look, so many of our neighbors have this, and so, it's out there, let's just go about living our life. I think that last couple months then are going to be wild. I think people are going to take off their mask and go about living their life and play a little slow pitch softball, Paul, but I'm afraid of that. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
I agree. I think we're already seeing it. I've had the need to travel throughout the pandemic, and it's being handled differently in different areas. People are generally tired. Yeah. We've been through a lot already. And this is it's not going to be a quick race to the finish here.
Yep. Paul Seegert, thank you, sir. I wish my theory was true, and I wish you would have said it's true, but I'll trust you. So thanks for coming down the road with us. I appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
When we come back, we're going to get a chance to visit with Marlo